we're now going to have a conversation. I may have had a Catholic upbringing, but I don't consider myself the Grand Inquisitor. This is Simon Estes. I think everybody knows this man. Yes, sir. So this is going to be yours. I think I'm mic'd over here. Okay. A little amplification. So there are many things that come to mind, but I first would like you, sir, to tell us all about your deep familiarity from the age of 2 with classical music. Not.
Well, I will start saying that I didn't know anything about really, well, that's not quite true. I grew up in a little town in Iowa called Centerville, Iowa, and it was about 8,000 people there, and a lot of people came there from many different countries because of the coal mines. And my father came from Virginia, but his father, my grandfather, was a slave, sold for $500. I have pictures of him. And my father came to Centerville. He was born in 1891. My mother was born in 1910. They were 19 years different, but they had a beautiful marriage, and I had 3 wonderful older sisters, and I was the last little scrawny child to come along. But we had a musical home. Had my mother not been born in 1910, I believe she would have been one of the greatest singers at the Metropolitan Opera House. She had an incredible voice, incredible range. She could sing soprano, and she could sing mezzo, and she could sing alto. And when she was about 89 years of age, she could sing a low D that I sing as a bass, and that's absolutely true. And so God had given her this exceptional voice. And so in our home, we didn't have classical music, but my oldest sister, who had a great voice too, she played the piano, and she played a lot of Chopin and Grieg. So I did have a little introduction to classical music, but I didn't really know anything about it until I went to the University of Iowa. I graduated out of high school in 1956, and when I was in junior high school, the high school choral director asked the principal of the junior high school if I could come sing in the high school choir. And that was allowed, and I went over and I sang first soprano in the soprano section until my senior year. And I played basketball and track and football, all of the sports. And we went for a rehearsal because, football practice starts before classes begin because, sports are more important than music. And so I went to football practice, and we had a choral rehearsal with Don Gunderson, who was a choir director at Centerville High School. So I went to sing something. Nothing really came out. And Don Gunderson, the choir director in Centerville, Iowa, sent me to a doctor because I was 18 years of age, and he just assumed my voice was never going to change, and I didn't know anything about singing except just singing. So I go to a doctor, a family doctor, and he looked in my throat. All he did, he had to take his little wooden stick, looked in there, and he said, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with your throat. I don't think he even saw my vocal cords. But he said, I have a feeling your voice is changing. And that's what happened. I literally, when I sang in first soprano, I could sing an octave higher than high C that the soprano sang. And I'm not saying this to try to impress you because God gave me the gift anyhow. But I could do that. So I sang in the choir. Then I went to the University of Iowa in 1957. I went 1 year to a community college in Centerville in 56, and then I transferred to the University of Iowa. I thought, well, I'll be a doctor and that I can't sing anymore. So I went pre-med, and a voice teacher came to the University of Iowa and heard me singing. And if it had not been for him, his name was Charles Kellis, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wanted to sing in the university choir back in the late 50s. And I went to the choir director. I won't mention his name. He's deceased, but nonetheless, he was the head of the voice department and the main choral director. And I said to him, "Oh, I'd like to sing in the university choir," and they had 300 voices. And he said, "Well, no," he said, "your voice isn't good enough." And so I said, "Oh, but aren't you?" I was very naive, incidentally. I said, "But you're the head of the voice department. Can I take voice lessons with you?" He said, "No, no, I wouldn't waste my time with you. You don't have any talent." So he said, "However, there's a young voice teacher coming here, and maybe he will take you." I said, "Well, okay," because all I wanted to do was sing. And that was this man, Charles Kellis, who came out there in 1961. He heard me singing in a choral group called the Old Gold Singers, and he said, "You know, you have a voice to sing opera." And having come from Centerville, Iowa, I said, "What's opera?" And this is all absolutely true. So he loaned me some recordings, those big 33 and a third, of Cesare Siepi, who was a terrible Italian bass. I say that to be facetious because he was the greatest for me. I heard that recording, and he gave me a recording of Leontine Price, Maria Callas, Jerome Hines, and a symphonic work, Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade, because he wanted me to hear this type of music. So I listened to them, and I took them back to Mr. Kellis. I said, "I really like that stuff." I just called it stuff. So he started giving me voice lessons, and he said, "You know, you really can be an opera singer." And at that time, I changed my major 4 times, incidentally, at the University of Iowa. I always tell students, do as I say and not as I did. But he got me into music. And I thank God that he sent this man out to Centerville, Iowa to discover me, because otherwise I wouldn't have known anything about opera or classical music. And I'm sure most of you know my age. In a few months, I'll be 80 years of age. But I've been really blessed, and I pray to God and I thank God for the talent that he gave Bach and Brahms and Beethoven and Schubert and Verdi and Wagner and Strauss and Puccini, all of these great composers that I didn't even know existed in Centerville, Iowa. And I've had the humbling honor of having sung all those works. I've sung 102 roles in opera. I probably sung 55 orchestral works. I've done most of Bach's works, and Haydn creation, seasons, etc. All because God gave talent to these great men. I think women would have had it too, but unfortunately, reality, they were men. And of course, we all know all the pieces that Bach wrote at the end. He always said, "To the glory of God." And God is a giver of all talent, whether you are a singer or Michael Jordan. He received those talents, because stop and think of those composers. Because I've lived in Europe more than half my life. I lived in Europe since 1965, and 3 of my daughters were born in Switzerland, 2 in Switzerland, 1 in the States. But I went to the places where Bach played the organ in Eisenach, and where Wagner wrote Tannhäuser, and to experience, there's something that you feel when you're around these areas where these great people compose music. The reason I say that talent really comes from God, think of these composers that wrote symphonies at 6 and 7 years of age. They had never gone to kindergarten, they hadn't gone to elementary school, let alone a conservatory or Juilliard, but God gave them the talent to write this music. And I think all of us who can sing and play this music, we are indeed blessed, because this period, thank you, because it all comes from God. I don't think this period will ever be repeated again, going back to Baroque period and the Romantic period and the Classical period. All of these great composers that we get to enjoy today as singers and as instrumentalists, we are very blessed and very fortunate. So because of Charles Kellis, who came to the University of Iowa, I said, I've sung 102 roles opera, 102 roles. I've sung with 115 different orchestras all around the world, and that's not to try to impress you, and 84 different opera houses. And all because of a little Greek man named Kyriakos, Charles Kellis, came to the University of Iowa. And this teacher who said I had no talent and I couldn't even sing in the choir of 300 voices, after I had been singing, he had retired and he went to San Antonio and was teaching privately. And I had been invited to sing with the orchestra in San Antonio, Texas. And I sang Amfortas and the Flying Dutchman and Wotan arias. And after the performance, he came up to me and he said, "Well, Simon, I see you've done quite well for yourself." And he walked away, and some of my colleagues said, "Why didn't you wipe him out?" I said, "No, it wasn't necessary." I said, "That took a lot of moot, chutzpah, for him to come back and just say, well, you've done quite well for yourself." And so I do really feel very blessed. My mother and my father taught me humility, and my sisters. And I want all of you to know I'm not trying to tell you how to live your spiritual lives, but I love the Lord, and I know that he gave this talent to me. And before I sing, I always pray and ask God that somebody's heart will be touched in the audience to love him and to love one another. I think we are really messengers of peace and love through music. And when I work with students, there's one thing, I know how important that vocal technique is, but I said, sing from your heart. That's what touches people, is when we sing from our hearts and our souls. And I cannot tell all of you here how blessed and humble I am to think that I've had this honor of having sung with all these great orchestras in the world. In America, going back to Eugene Ormandy, Eric Leinsdorf, Leonard Bernstein, and sung with people like Birgit Nilsson, Joan Sutherland, Leontine Price, the tenors. I sang with all the great tenors. We forget about some of the other tenors like Bergonzi and Nicolai Gedda and these people. I sang with those guys in addition to the three tenors that, what are their names? But I've learned a lot and sang with Birgit Nilsson, Wotan, and she did Brunhilde. And I don't want to tell you a compliment she gave me because I don't like to boast, and because I was taught never to do that, but I was very touched by something that she said to me and Leontine Price. I want to ask all of you a question. It's not going to be a test, but just a question. Do you know who the first composer was? Well, God, yes, but in human form. Yeah. We know that God came down here in the form of Jesus Christ and said, "God be with you." So let's put it this way. Who was the first person that God gave talent to about music and to compose music? King David, that's right. Little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah, hallelujah. When Saul was going crazy, who did he call upon? David. He played the lyre, the harp. That's how long ago that music got started. And I think one of the earliest composers I sang was Monteverdi's opera, Il ritorno d'Ulisse in Patria. But all through that, I've sung all these great composers. And so I just want you to know that I thank God for this journey that he's put me on. And you mentioned when we talked privately, you wanted me to mention a little bit about my life, so that's enough about my life. Sure. What do you want to go to now?
But Mr. Kellis was there last night.
He was there last night, 90 years of age. And he's still doing well because he's married to a young lady 45 years younger than he is. She's from Poland, has a beautiful voice.
TMI now. You know, so. All right, now, okay, but in passing, you said something about your grandfather, who was born in 1837.
1837.
It was 180 years ago.
Right. I have pictures of my grandfather and my grandmother, slaves sold for $500. Yes.
Obviously, knowing that and having the career you had, but at the same time, there's something else we should certainly touch upon, especially with this audience. which is the discrimination and racism that Sylvia and you and George Shirley and others had to fight to be able to get up and sing at all in these places. And we know people like Bill Warfield just didn't even try to deal with it. Say something to us about how both you confronted that, what that was, how you confronted it, and what you think about that issue today.
Can I just ask one thing? Were you rejected from the college choir because you were black?
Yes, just to be quite honest, yes, yeah. But, you know, my parents taught me at a young age to follow the philosophy of Jesus, who was a man of love. And so when I was in high school in Centerville, Iowa, now keep in mind I was born in 1938, if I would come home, as an example I'll give you, and I would tell my mother that a white boy called me the N-word or he hit me, my mother said, well, now, son, you get down on your knees and you pray for that boy. Well, when you're 7 or 8 years of age, you think there's something wrong with your mother's mind. And so you say, Mother, but wait a minute, he called me the N-word and he hit me. My mother said, you get down on your knees and you pray for that boy. What manifested itself in 1971, I was living here in New York, and I called my mother, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, men's, $250 fine. My phone went off, I got to turn it off.
Yeah, there you go.
And I don't know.
Turn off your phone.
Yes.
You're supposed
Actually, it's Don Simonson from Iowa State University. Just a second. Donald. Oh. I'll have to call you back. I'm sitting here and the audience is laughing in New York City. So Donald, I'll call you back. I'll tell him who you are. Okay? All right, thank you. You know, a lot of orchestras, when these little apparatus, that was my grandson's picture.
Yeah.
Some of the orchestra would find $250 if someone's phone went off. So that really corrected it. But anyhow, it manifested itself when I started singing opera. So in 1971, I can still remember, I called my mother in tears. I said, you know, Mother, I've sung in Paris and London, Vienna, Berlin, Hamburg. I'd even sung in Australia at that point. And I said, they won't let me sing in some of the opera houses in my own country. And I was crying. And she said, well, son, get down on your knees and you pray. And after that, I sang in Chicago, San Francisco, eventually at the Met, Boston, etc. Then I've sung in most of the opera houses, Seattle, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, rather than Seattle, Washington, so kind of all over. But there was, and I regret this, I say this with great sadness, there is still discrimination. I remember the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, singing a leader of in a recital. And I had the TV on while I was getting dressed, and there was Walter Cronkite, of course. And he said, Martin Luther King has been shot. And 5 minutes later, I'm sure you probably have seen this many times, they played it over, he said, and he took his glasses off, Martin Luther King is dead. And I realized when I went out from my recital that I had to change it because I didn't feel like singing any jovial songs. And the people in Canada, they had a reception for me after. I can still remember. They said, why don't you come and live in Canada because we won't discriminate against you. And I said, no, $250. I heard a phone call. I said, no. I said, because I'm going to stay in my country and fight the battle to try to win equality. And I told them, I said, you know, because at that time we had about 10 million African American people. I said, if they come to Canada, I said, you'll have a problem too. Not that we are intrinsically with problems, but there's just a difference. I said, so I will not give up my citizenship, but I will stay and continue the struggle. And so the way I have endured discrimination has been without bitterness, without hate, but love can conquer and everything. Love can do that. I'm not saying that Germany and Italy and France and Spain and Russia and Poland and all these places where I've sung, they're perfect, but in Germany, when I first started singing my career, I sang Ramphis in Aida in 1965, April 19th, I will not forget that date. They would judge someone more on, as Martin Luther King said, the quality of the character, but the quality of the voice. Because they have makeup. You know, they can make somebody look like E.T. if they want to today. And I remember when I did Ramphis in Berlin, I sang with Richard Castley. I'm sure you know Richard Castley was the Radames. And Gloria Davy, an African-American soprano, sang Aida. Ruth Heffer sang Amneris, the mezzo in Aida. Amneris, yeah, that's right. I was thinking of Abel Lee and Don Carlo because of last night. But anyhow, they made me up, and it's really true, as white as snow. And I remember I was sitting in the makeup chair, and I looked at in the mirror, and I said, if my mother could only see me now. But I went ahead and sang. Oh, I have to tell you, can I tell them another little interesting story?
You do it.
Okay.
So far, you haven't been able to stop
right.
you from saying
Mr. Kellis, at one point, he said, he always called me Simone. His parents were both born in Greek. Of course, he was Greek, but he was in America. He said, you need to go to an all-musical school. So he arranged an audition for me at Juilliard School of Music. Now, having come from Centerville, Iowa, I didn't understand the magnitude of Juilliard School of Music. I look back on it now, and I think I realized it was a blessing. Because I come out to New York, had never been on an airplane before. This was 1963, and I was more excited about seeing the tall buildings than just this Juilliard School of Music, whatever it was. So I sang the audition. Some of you remember the name Sergius Cogan. He was there, and I ended up coaching with him. But anyhow, I finished my 3 songs, and in fact, I did King Philip, sorry, from Don Carlo. And I did Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, and I did one of the Fiorenza Gesänge songs. I finished singing, and they said, would you just wait outside the door there? So that was the one up on 125th Street, you know, the old Juilliard. And I went out, I was just like sniffing the halls. They felt great, smelled great to me. And no, they really did, because it was just fascinating. And I didn't know still the importance of Juilliard. So after about 10 minutes, they called me back in. And I go in, I was a little skinny colored kid from Centerville, Iowa, and they said, well, you know, we want to give you a full scholarship to come to Juilliard. And I said, oh, thanks. I didn't really know. And Mr. Kellis had told them my financial status, and they said, and we'll get you a Martha Baird Rockefeller family grant. I thought, I want this Rockefeller deal in rocks. I didn't know. But I look back on that now, and it was a blessing that I was so naive because I didn't have enough, we say sense, but I didn't have enough knowledge to be nervous singing at Juilliard School of Music. It's like singing in the Colored Second Baptist Church in Centerville, Iowa. You got a group of people sitting there, and you just go out and you sing. Right. So I just went on and sang my pieces and left. And so I tell that because knowing what I know now, I would have been a nervous wreck auditioning Juilliard. So the way I conquered the racial, not conquered, but the way I worked on the racial situation was through courage, determination, no bitterness, and I do believe in science, I do believe in facts. So when I would talk about it, I'd get lots of interviews about it in Europe as well as in the United States. And I would just say back in, the middle 60s when I started my career, people would say, well, I remember I was singing out in Salem, Washington, a recital, and they said, why aren't you singing at the Met? I said, well, because I don't bring up this topic. I said, well, there is for sociological reasons. Well, what do you, so they kept pressing me. So I said, well, how many singers of color, I said, and especially males, do we have singing leading roles at the Metropolitan Opera? Well, you're wrong. There's Leontine Price. I said yes. Martina, the Puerto Rico, no, Martina Arroyo. Yes. I said, how many men? Well, there's. And they didn't remember George Shirley, but George was there. So I explained, I said that there is a problem there. I said, but I would rather not go into this as a reception after my recital. I don't want, because they were, I'm sorry to say, all Caucasian. I said, I don't want to mess up the reception and make it. So I just, all my whole career, my life, I realized I had to be well prepared because I couldn't be, as a human being, equal with a white colleague. I had to be better. Not that I was intrinsically, and I'm not any better, and I've never in my life ever said that I was great, because I would never say that about myself. I just go out and try to do a job, but I conquered it with prayer. I would pray. I listened to my mother and took her advice, and I grew up in this family that, economically speaking, we were poor. We didn't have electricity in our house. When I was a little boy, we had coal oil lamps, and we didn't have running water in my house. In Iowa, it gets cold in the winter until my sophomore year in high school. But we had faith, we had courage, we had compassion, and we had forgiveness. So that's what has enabled me to overcome a lot of the racial discrimination. And I always was very sad for Paul Robeson. I knew his son, and I sang in a great concert once honoring Paul Robeson. And Bill Warfield, I could almost cry right now. He never sang at the Met, and he should have sung there, but he didn't get a chance. And so I tell all of my young African American men, don't give up. You just can't give up. Just work hard, study hard. Don't become bitter, because then you damage your own heart. And that heart is the source of life and where blood comes. And that's what we're supposed to sing from and play the piano. When I came to Juilliard, something else interesting, and I hope you won't be upset with me, but I'm talking about the voice teacher right there. I didn't buy hardly any recordings of singers. I bought piano recordings of Rudolph Serkin, Rubinstein, Glenn Gould, pianists, and I would just sit and listen to the Goldberg variations that Gould played, that first one. I would listen to it so much I think I could have sung all of them. And Rubinstein, so once in a while he hit a wrong note, but you know what? Didn't matter, because what did he do? He played from his heart. And that's what touched the people. And I bought symphonic. I used to listen to the Mahler Fifth Symphony so many times, and especially the Adagio movement. I used to listen to Samuel Barber's the famous Adagio. And this is where I learned my musicianship from these great artists. And then as my career on, incidentally, Horowitz was my neighbor almost in New York, and I remember him. But I don't know why it was that I just listened to symphonic and piano music and very few singers. But to answer your question about the racism, unfortunately it does still exist. And I really hope and pray that the day will come when the only color there will be the way somebody colors their voice, or the way they make beautiful, colorful music and sounds with the piano and the violin. I was so honored to have known Isaac Stern, because you know at one point they were going to tear down Carnegie Hall. Some of you who are in advanced years like I am, they were going to do it, and Isaac Stern came, and I sang in a concert, and we saved to have a medal saying help Carnegie Hall. Mm-hmm. But we just have to keep on struggling, and I just hope the day will come when we don't see color. I believe that God made us all of a different skin color, different shapes of our eyes, to test the character of us as human beings. Can we love someone just because they don't look the same way we do? I think he's testing us. And those of us if we want to win and get an A on the test, we are going to have to love one another, and we're going to have to forgive.
All right.